Think you got game? Can you justify insta-locking Duelist with your current skills? Well, listen, dude, if you're still making these low elo decisions and plays, well, I hardly think so. And if you're here today, fate has decided to give you just what you needed. In this video, we're going to be treading the difference between bad duelists, well, aka you, and good duelists, such as Demon 1, Kang Kang, and Woot. When you've been stuck in your elo for a long time, the tendency is for you to think you're generally doing a good job and that you just get teamed up with bad players. We've all been there. But honestly, it takes a little bit of self-awareness to acknowledge the little mistakes that keep you from improving and winning and excelling in elo. Now, for some common scenarios of a bad duelist being, well, bad, I've collected 3 different rounds played by a single player. Try to observe every single decision they made and see if you're guilty of these same little nuances that I picked out. In this first example, you might be able to relate a little bit more than you'd expect. Here we have a Neon player on a double duelist comp with Yoru. This is the 8th round of their attacking, and the enemy team is on their eco. Now, at the start of this supposed B-side execute, we can see a few seconds of indecisiveness from Neon. 3 of his teammates were already scaling forward, Harbor was setting up an early wall from mid-shops, while Neon was pacing back and forth here. He ended up going a little bit of a different route by lurking instead of pushing with his teammates. Now, essentially, there's nothing necessarily totally wrong with lurking. However, it does always depend on the situation. It's a situational tactic. If your team is not on the same page with it, it might end up, well, just being pointless. And if you get caught in a ratty spot alone, you have no one to trade you and you give away a free rifle in the process. Now, as the round progressed, we saw the Neon scaling toward mid. And just like that, he gets picked off by the enemy KO, who already took space on mid and was about to flank. Sure, the team was able to take the site, yes, but giving away advantages like this is exactly the first step to getting thrifty, man. Now, on top of that, the indecisiveness in that early part of the round, it caused a potentially good positioning if you were planning to lurk. Remember, every single second in a round counts for something, and each second you spend in a single area, you're giving up other parts of the map. Therefore, you should always anticipate that someone might have already controlled certain areas that your team was not able to clear or control. Which brings us to point number 2, clearing each corner. As seen from how Neon scaled up toward mid, it seemed like an auto-piloted action, and we've all been there where we just chose a specific angle to aim, but didn't really account for the other areas that might have already been occupied. All of these combined led to Neon's downfall, every single one of those little steps, potentially risking a thrifty. Now, if you're just starting out in Valorant or you still feel like your aim just isn't really cutting it, it can be pretty tough to feel like you've caught up to players who have literally spent thousands of hours in this game. Now, luckily, over at SkillCapped, we have worked with professionals to create 3 world-class aim courses that are designed to fast-track that progress and take you from a noob to an absolute pro in just about 3 months of playing. And so next, we have a Raze playing on Lotus. The round starts with a typical early pressure on a rubble, but in this case, it's just the Raze with paint shells. And if you take a quick glance at the minimap right here, you can see that the rest of the team isn't really committed to doing a layered pressure and aggression on A site. And based on the direction Raze was facing, he was likely anticipating an early dash from the Jett, hence throwing the paint shells in that direction. And that's exactly what happened after the barrier drops, except that there was no Jett dashing into rubble. Shortly after, Clove gets picked off in B main by the enemy Phoenix and the enemy Jett, and Chamber gets spotted on C mound. Now, based on this info, the enemy team is playing a slow contact default. Raze then proceeds to grab the orb at A rubble. Now, what I would have done differently here is at least ask for a teammate to cover me while I was taking the orb, especially since Clove or Breach could have easily taken advantage of this brief period of vulnerability here. Now, since Gecko was just nearby, Raze could have just simply asked for cover to safely take the orb. Nevertheless, Raze was able to secure that orb and live, so no harm, no foul. He then proceeds to rotate to C through the baby door since it's looking like a C site execute. But the Yoru spots the enemy Phoenix still lurking on B, and with the dimensional drift, this could be a perfect chance for Raze to pick off the distracted Phoenix. However, instead of peeking properly, Raze pulled out his boombot and sent it toward Phoenix. The reason this was incredibly risky is that we can clearly see Phoenix's position here, and given how close Phoenix is, we could have just prepared for a gunfight or an anti-flash strat instead of pulling out a utility here. This resulted in the Raze getting fully blinded. Thankfully, Yoru was able to grab his attention and eventually get the kill with a knife in what seemed to be a very scuffed battle. Now, while this was ongoing, the enemy team had already taken control of C and planted the spike. Now, in this part, the idea from Raze was actually pretty decent here. Opening the door in C mound could distract the enemy team and divide their attention while the rest of his teammates push from CT and Waterfall. However, two things went totally wrong in this retake. One, Raze's teammates weren't ready and in position to capitalize on the door being opened. Two, Raze's peek was slow and full of hesitation. The first few jiggles easily gave away Raze's exact positioning and were honestly really easily punishable if the enemy pre-fired that angle. Now, given the failed attempt, Raze falls back and heads to CT. Now, at this point, it was a 3v3 situation, but Chamber and Yoru fell to the enemy Jett shortly. With nowhere to hide, Raze couldn't seem to land a shot between the breach and the Jett, and quite frankly, that's all she wrote for that round. Now, the thing about peeking and retaking is that you have to do it with an approach or a plan in mind. Raze stayed in that open position for way too long, making him an easy target for the enemy team. And instead of just adjusting by repositioning or seeking cover, he kind of just stayed there and committed to the duel in hopes of landing a headshot. Now, I know we've all been there and that's an easy decision to make, but if you notice the enemy team peeking Raze here, Jett dashed out after missing a few shots, Breach ducked down to cover after missing a few shots, and basically, it's kind of the act of resetting and seeking cover when you've already missed a shot or two. It would have been better if the Raze repositioned right after Jett dashed out or used his satchels to find cover. Each agent, they have their own set of utilities that really can be used in a variety of ways, and since his satchels were full, this could have been a difference maker in the outcome of that round. Now, because of the open angle Raze was in, he wasn't able to isolate 1v1s, which could have increased his chances of clutching. And finally, he wasn't able to isolate 1v1s, which could have increased his chances at clutching. Finally, we have another Raze, but this time on Haven. Now, as this round starts, we see Raze and Reyna playing near sewers. Now, as much as A long was left unguarded, Raze and Reyna doubling up in short could have caught the enemy off guard pretty easily. However, you can sense some hesitation and disconnection between the two, as they didn't really play deeper in short together. Now, both of them were unable to position fast enough for a decent cross, and with the enemy Fade throwing an early C's, they did decide to back off. After Clove smokes off sewers, we can see Raze preparing to throw a paint shell while directly facing that smoke. Now, due to the sound of a Yoru pop flash, Raze throws a paint shell, but in that split second, we can see Yoru peeking out from the smoke. And this is exactly what we fear in these types of situations, and we should have been dead already. Luckily, Raze survives, gets the Yoru with a couple of right clicks, and picks off Omen with the paint shell. Now, since his team was on an eco, this was a golden opportunity to turn things around, as there was absolutely a free-to-claim Spectre. Raze's location gets pinged out by the Haunt, followed by a Prowler. In response, he throws a paint shell toward A long to prevent the enemy from pushing him while he reloads and holds sewers. Now, in contrast to how he threw the nade early on, this was definitely a good example of how to do it safely. This also brought enough time for two of his teammates to rotate and provide assistance. And with a crisp deagle headshot from Clove, Fade goes down, leaving the round in a 2v4. This was already a much desired outcome, given that his team was on an eco due to a lost pistol round. And honestly, the round could have easily been theirs already. However, Raze makes a common duelist mistake here: overheating. He decides to continue pushing forward with the Spectre without anyone backing him up. And as a result, Skye drops him with a single ghost headshot, then Clove falls to the enemy Cypher. The numbers advantage went down the drain in an instant, and they ended up losing the round. And by a show of hands here, how many of us have been in a 4v2 and literally done that same thing, and we were the ones that made it happen? A moment of silence for us. Now, while overheating is a universal thing, it's a common mistake that often happens to Duelists. I know, I get it. Sometimes you feel like you're in the zone, and you need to quench your thirst by claiming more targets, man. But advantages like these, they're golden given the odds you were originally against. Putting it to waste by overstaying your welcome, man, it can quickly turn the tide against you and your team. And it's also kind of a bummer, knowing that winning on an eco round was well within reach. Now, let's compare how these bad Duelist habits and the decisions differ from a Radiant Pro player's typical round. Now, in particular, we're going to be looking at 3 different rounds from Woot, Kang Kang, and Demon 1, who are all exemplary duelists in their respective regions. Each of them show different duelist qualities that you should apply in your games to improve your understanding and your mechanics of the role even further. In this match from Woot's stream, we see him and his team doing a full send on A. Before the round starts, he lets his team know where he's going to nade to give them a little bit of a space and safety to work with.
Yep, I'm going to nade door. Oh, we can TP Rebel, and if they cross to you, you can just pat on and play.
Someone spam here, my ping.
And on top of that, he suggests that Omen TP into Rubble and do a paranoia play should anyone cross. Everything else follows as the rest of his team layers up actions and utilities to support their push on Rubble. These are really the types of pre-round calls and comms that you really need to incorporate into your games if you want synergy between your teammates. Getting everyone on that same page, it's also just going to increase the success of every strategy that you guys try to do significantly. And all it takes is letting your team know what you plan to do and what you need help with. Now, unfortunately, Omen does get caught open as the enemy team scales and attacks much faster than expected. However, Woot does remain composed as he adjusts his aim and calls out the enemy's locations. From here on out, the rest of his team uses their utilities to gain control and support Woot as he pressed on. Remember this, apart from being able to call the shots, a good duelist has to recognize when to capitalize on their teammates' utilities. Now, as they scale forward, Teho dies from the enemy Clove at the baby door, but Woot gets the trade shortly after. Notice how he approached this duel in particular here. After the first peek, he misses a few of his bullets. Now, instead of just sticking around in the open, he strafes back into cover, pulls out his paint shell, and throws it in that direction. Remember that Raze who held a paint shell in front of the smoke earlier? Well, Woot's utility usage is the exact opposite of that. He was quick, he was precise, and he was decisive in throwing out his nade, minimizing any risks of getting punished while his utility was out. This is another skill that you really need to learn if you're playing duelists that have these kinds of utilities. If you can't throw or use them at an angle where you're safe, you have to do it swiftly to avoid giving the enemy a free target to shoot. Now, because of this nade, Clove was too uncomfortable to win the fight that Woot managed to win the duel. His teammates then call for Cypher to take the orb for the neural theft. This allowed them to determine which route to go, given that they have no specific info on the last 2 players' whereabouts. As the neural theft activates, Woot pops his showstopper to create space for his team. He launches it towards stairs, and while it doesn't land a kill, it does force the enemy team to back off. But since they notice that both defenders are leaning towards A, Breach calls to rotate to B, which Woot immediately follows and reinforces to his team. Being able to lead and call those shots just like this is an ideal trait for any duelist, but being a good follower? Man, that's pretty much just as necessary. No ego, no pride, just good adaptability, good teammate. Now, while passing through A-Link, notice how Woot briefly presses tab here. And no, this isn't to check his kills or stats. Once he found out Breach was 2 points away from his Rolling Thunder, he passed the spike so he could plant. This is also the kind of proactivity that you should really pay attention to if you want to win more matches. Take note, I said matches here because this move from Woot, while it may seem a little bit small, is actually an act of seeing the bigger picture of the game. While it may become a useful trump card to hold on to in case things go south, it's also an accessible advantage that could be brought to the next round or so. As they exit A-Link, Woot realigns his crosshair on Upper and gets a swift headshot on Chamber. Sadly, the ace wasn't his for the taking as Cypher claims the last player. Now, don't get it twisted here. The crispy shots that led to that 4K aren't the focus. Sure, they were a hefty bonus, but what mattered ultimately was how he leads his team, how he uses his utilities to give the team an advantage, and his overall awareness and game sense. In contrast to what we've seen from Woot, let's head over to this round from Kang Kang, where there was minimal comms. Kang Kang was active in his defensive approach in this round as he played near the barrier toward Baths. He did a quick jiggle, noted Jett's location, and baited a knife from her Blade Storm. Knowing that Jett can overwhelm him with her ult and not know the rest of the enemy team's exact whereabouts, he backs away to safety. Now, as a good duelist, you have to also exercise discipline and know when you should or shouldn't take fights. And in Kang Kang's case, Let's just say he'd prefer to take the fights on site where he has teammates to trade him rather than fighting alone. Again, if you recall our bad duelist example with Raze on Haven, it showed how low elo duelists can often overheat or overextend, and as a result, it leads to giving up advantages and sometimes even the round altogether. Now with Kang Kang's discipline, he realizes that there's no need to take that kind of a risky fight early on, and the info he gathered was way more than enough. In short, you should give yourself the right balance between confidently allowing yourself to pop off and also being patient with utmost discipline. Moving back to the clip here. He then sends his boombot, followed by a paint shell to delay the enemy's push on showers and buy time for his team to rotate. Now, as soon as Breach engages from lamps, Kang Kang immediately activates Showstopper and satchels upward to support his teammate and pressure the enemy team. With a quick adjustment, he finds the Clove, picks him off, and spots the Jett pushing out of baths. Because of the direction he threw the Showstopper, he was able to find cover behind default. If he hadn't, he would have been left vulnerable and an easy target for Jett. Then he plays around Brim's smoke to reposition and reclaim the unaccounted for area near baths. And while this duel left him open to Sky peeking from baths, he maintained his composure and simply adjusted his crosshair for the next kill. Normally, this would have been easily punishable, but if there's one thing Kang Kang has, well, it's nerves of steel, man. And honestly, it's not a bad thing to have here. Having nerves of steel, well, it kind of beats having to panic when you're presented with situations just like this one, and for the last kill, he gets a little bit creative by satcheling on top of triple. This is a risky move that I really don't recommend to everyone, but it can absolutely catch your enemy off guard at times. Plus, Jett is the last one alive, so it does become a more viable play. Now, comparing this to Woot's clip, just like I said, Kang Kang provided minimal comms here, and in some cases, that's really going to be completely fine, especially if there's a lot going on site. In situations like these, it's enough to let your team know the enemy's whereabouts and play around each other's contact and utilities. You don't have to match that chaos on site by bombarding your comms with unnecessary info. So in Kang Kang's highlight as a duelist, the key takeaways here are his proactivity and reaction to teammates' contact, his composure and confidence when taking fights, and his creativity with utility usage. And finally, in our last demonstration here, we have Demon 1 playing Waylay on Sunset. And on this round review, it's honestly going to be a little bit of a combination of what we've seen from both Woot and Kang Kang. But you'll notice a major difference here in how he plays Duelist through his comms, so really try to observe how he communicates and translates it into actions. He starts the round aggressively on mid by peeking from a risky off angle. Under normal circumstances, man, I really wouldn't recommend being in this spot given how open it leaves you to multiple angles. But if there's anything that we've learned from playing in risky off angles, is that they're made more doable by agents with a get-out-of-jail-free card, which in this case is Waylay's Refract. Nevertheless, I wouldn't completely agree with playing this spot solo because of how bad it could go and how easily he could have been spotted. This is exactly what happens though as the enemy Sova sends a dart that reveals almost the entirety of mid. Demon 1 decides to hold the angle on mid-bottom instead of shooting the dart, just in case someone peeks prematurely. Unfortunately, no one does, and he gets overwhelmed by two peekers from tiles. Now, at this particular moment, if you'd be thinking something like, how in the world is this an example of a good duelist? I would understand where you're coming from. Mainly, the ability to recognize when you overstayed your welcome and how you respond to your miscalculations is what I'm getting at here. So unlike what we saw from the Raze and Lotus earlier, Demon 1 refracts back to safety as soon as he misses the headshot. Sure, Raze doesn't have a refract like Waylay, but with two satchels you can get creative with mobility just a little bit more. If you're unable to util your way out in a terribly open spot, then maybe that's just a lesson in finding the right angles to peek and win. With Demon 1 knowing there are multiple enemies nearby, he tells his team that there are 3 people in mid and that he needs urgent help.
Help! I'm helping. Oh my god, he's in the smoke, Neon.
Gecko jokes around by saying he's cooked, but he and Breach were able to help out by spamming the smoke, using Aftershock, and throwing Mosh Pit. Now, the Aftershock plus Mosh Pit may have been overkill, but it was done in a fight-or-flight kind of response, so no harm, no foul here. Had Demon 1 not asked for help, the enemy team could have caught him vulnerable as he was returning to his refract spot. Sometimes, really all it takes to salvage a dire situation like that is to simply just ask for help. after the scuffed engagement, Demon 1 quickly recalls the info gathered from mid and rotates to market. This is another layer of proactivity and awareness from him, as he notes the area they gave up or left unattended.
I have the line like that. Could be past this line.
Yeah, I hear you.
One speaking.
I have Ayla.
Cypher's comms were also good, as he reaffirmed which exact spot on market is safe and which area is unaccounted for. Cypher tags Neon, which forces her back, and Demon 1 decides to press forward on mid to claim space and potentially catch a timing on the flank.
Be mean, be mean, be mean. Get ready for B.
This allowed him to gather info that there's at least one heading to B and that they might lean toward the site. As he catches Neon leaving with her knife out, he immediately realizes that she wasn't committing to this area, which would likely mean that the rest of the enemy team is on A. This pivoted the team to reinforce A due to the amount of info he gathered by flanking mid. As he doubles up with Gecko and they scale towards CT, pay attention to how Demon 1 really communicates here.
Really close. Speaking with you? I'm back home.
On site.
He tells his teammate things like holding close, peeking with you, and I have back haul. These are all great comm phrases that reassure your teammate as you scale forward. Now, it may not seem like a big deal, but hearing these comms are helpful in narrowing down what else you can do to complement what your teammate is doing as the round progresses. Now, the rest of the comms from his teammates are simple yet effective, as they just ask each other for utilities so they can safely reclaim space. Finally, Demon 1 finds 2 on elbow with a few crisp shots. And with Vice left in her lonesome, Demon 1 activates Refract, dashes forward, notes her position, and refracts back to safety. He knew he didn't have to go for the kill here, and he was completely unprepared to take a gunfight. All he had to do was reveal Vice's positioning and bamboozle her so the rest of his team could follow up and finish the job. Sadly, Vice still managed to get 2 more picks before failing, but it was still a well-played round. His team's success was all on how open Demon 1 was with his communication. Other desirable duelist traits from Demon 1 in this round will absolutely include responding accordingly to plans that fail, recognizing giving up space, and generally just making the lives of his teammates easier with good comms and utility usage. These 3 excellent duelists are the best at what they do for a reason, and it's mostly for simple things that often get overlooked by people in lower elos. Remember, it's not always about the aim, but how well you play with your team. All right, though, guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little bit more about SkillCapped. So we offer a 5-division rank up guarantee, and we think that's a pretty crazy thing to offer. It's kind of like a gym membership guaranteeing you that you're gonna get ripped. Your local gym would probably go bust if they offered you that. But not us, because we've offered this for years because our service really does work. It works so well, in fact, that we're able to produce by far the largest catalog of premium Valorant guides on the internet. We add new courses every month with over 1,000 guides curated into over 50 courses. No one can compare. We also have a direct line of communication with subscribers in our Discord so that you can get connected immediately to some of the best players in the game who will respond to every question you ask. Sign up today for as little as $6.99 a month if you're serious about improving your game. So that's going to be all for this one today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.